This is 9/11 Freefall.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is your host, Andy Steele. This is 9/11 Freefall. Thanks for listening. Tonight, the guest is Rachel Colton. She's one of AE 9/11 Truth's dedicated volunteer activists. She's also an elementary school teacher. And tonight, we're going to be talking about that dilemma I've talked about before on this show. You know, what do you do if you're a teacher and you are awake to the fact that the buildings in New York, buildings 1, 2, and 7, were brought down in controlled demolitions on 9/11? And what if your school is trying to push the official story? What do you do in that situation? How do you deal? On top of that, how do you deal if you're a student and you're awake to the 9/11 controlled demolition evidence? How do you reach out to other students? Or what if you're a parent? You know, what if your kid is having issues or is getting hassled at school because of his outspoken advocacy of 9/11 truth? So we're going to be wrestling with that dilemma tonight. It's a very well-spoken, great activist, Rachel is. So I'll be playing that for you in just a few minutes. Before we get to the interview, though, there's a couple of things I want to go over with you. First things first, I want to play this clip. Now, this has been making the rounds. I think the story broke today. It's Tuesday as I record this intro. And this is Jonathan Gruber, and he is a professor of economics at Massachusetts Institute of Technology, and he was one of the architects of the Affordable Health Care Act, often referred to as Obamacare. Now, obviously, this is making a lot of rounds on conservative talk radio because this really makes the Obama administration and those who were behind Obamacare look bad. Now, I'm not playing this on this show because of Obamacare. This show is not about those kinds of political issues. As you listen to this, I want you to let the words that this guy is saying sink in. Now, he's talking about them pushing through Obamacare, but really what he says and this attitude reflected really shows how the people at the top, the people who are making policy for the American people, view the American people. Because this permeates every color in the spectrum. This goes from healthcare, this goes to surveillance, this goes to covering up 9/11. This is how the people in government view you. And as he says this, I want you to think about transparency and 9/11 truth, the lack of transparency from our federal investigators, the people tasked with investigating the 9/11 crime. All right, listen.
It's just, you can't do it politically. You just literally cannot do it. Okay? Transparent financing, unless I have transparent financing, also transparent spending. I mean, this bill was written in a tortured way to make sure CBO did not score the mandate as taxes. If CBO scored the mandate as taxes, the bill dies. Okay, so it's written to do that. In terms of risk-rated subsidies, if you had a law which said healthy people are going to pay in, it made explicit that healthy people pay in and sick people get money, it would not have passed. Okay, just like the people, lack of transparency is a huge political advantage, and basically, call it the stupidity of the American voter or whatever. But basically, that was really, really critical to get anything to pass. And, it's the second best argument. Look, I wish Mark was right. We can make it all transparent, but I'd rather have this law than not. So it's kind of like his reporter story. There's things I wish I could change, but I'd rather have this law than not.
All right, so blame it on the stupidity of the American voter. And lack of transparency is a political advantage. Now, again, without getting into the stuff about Obamacare, I want you to just think or realize that this is the way that the people who make policy think of you. Do you think it's just this guy? Honestly, use your common sense. Do you think it's just Jonathan Gruber who talks like this? Now, I understand the Republicans are going to make a big stink about this and take advantage of this, but I guarantee you that there's people on the Republican side, too, talking this exact same way. The fact that Jonathan Gruber just so freely says this in a public forum, it took a year for this to hit the internet. Goes to show you the arrogance of the people that we're up against. And you can see this when the C-SPAN campaign was going on. The arrogance of politicians and media people. when they're confronted with hard facts about Building 7, how they just dismiss it, call it a conspiracy theory. It's just their way of waving a magic wand and making the issue go away, at least for the moment. But it doesn't go away because we keep on pushing forward. And they're not going to be able to run from it for long. But I wanted to play this because I wanted to just drive it home for this audience, how your people who are making laws for you, people who are supposed to be overseeing the well-being of this country, view you, all right, and how they rely on this lack of transparency to get what they want. You know, in this case, they wanted to get a law passed. Well, what if they want to get a war started? You know, well, I'm not big on lack of transparency, but if you really want this war started, and of course, they don't have to justify it to you because they know better than you. That's a very arrogant attitude, but a lot of people in power are very arrogant. So there you go. All right, I want to go over this article that's up at ae911truth.org. It's titled Cyrus Vance Jr., Manhattan DA on Notice Again. And in the beginning of the article, it reminds you that on February 14th, 2013, AE911 Truth petitioned the office of Cyrus Vance Jr., he's the district attorney in New York County, and they asked him for a confidential meeting with him or a member of his staff for the purpose of requesting an appointment of a special prosecutor and the calling of a grand jury to investigate the destruction of Building 7 and the Twin Towers. I actually interviewed a legal expert a year ago about this. You can find that in the archives. I'm going to read you just a quick portion of this. It says, after consulting with many sources and experts, we noted that the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey, which has public responsibility for security of the buildings of the World Trade Center and is subject to the jurisdiction of the state of New York, had entered into security contracts with certain companies for work inside the buildings of the World Trade Center during the year preceding 9/11. These contracts covered work on elevators, which could easily have provided access to elevator shafts and internal structures. This unfettered access could have compromised security of the World Trade Center buildings to such an extent that it made the professional engineering of controlled demolitions throughout the months leading up to 9/11 entirely conceivable. The actual contracts for work on elevators are available on the internet. And then the article goes on, it says, furthermore, we have confirmed that neither the Federal Bureau of Investigations nor the National Commission on Terrorist Acts upon the United States, that's the 9/11 Commission, made any attempt to consider controlled demolition as a cause of the destruction of the 3 World Trade Center buildings, nor did the authorities publicly investigate the security contracts signed by the Port Authority for the World Trade Center during the year preceding 9/11. All right, so just more of the same, showing that a real investigation wasn't done. Obviously, these buildings were brought down in a controlled demolition. Once you get past the shock and awe of the event, of the initial emotion that hits you as you see these buildings come down, and you look at it with a critical eye and look at the science, all right, it becomes clear. The evidence shows this. And you have this unprecedented collapses, quote unquote. Building 7 is not even hit by an airplane. Of course you would want to look into controlled demolition, the possibility of that. But of course our federal officials tasked with investigating the destructions of these buildings did not. They refused to, adamantly refused to, even to this day. And of course they won't look into these contracts either, which would have made it conceivable. And of course when you talk about 9/11 truth, when you talk about the science proving it was a controlled demolition, the public's been conditioned to react hostily and say, you think the government did it. You think that Bush orchestrated the destruction of the towers. Well, this is not about Bush, all right? This is not about inside job. This is about science. Now, who is responsible? That's what we need to find out from a real investigation. But why wouldn't you look into controlled demolition simply to find out that some other entity wasn't involved? We've asked these questions before on this show. But the article also says, if you scroll down a little ways, in light of the new evidence regarding the security contracts of the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey, we decided to petition Mr. Vance a second time on May 21st, 2014. Once again, we asked for a confidential meeting to discuss appointing a special prosecutor and a grand jury that would investigate the true cause of the 3 buildings' destruction on 9/11/2001. This time, Vance refused even the courtesy of replying to our lawyer in New York City, who later advised that we could now conclude that Vance has no intention of responding and that we should feel free to inform the general public of that fact. If the district attorney and or his designated lieutenants had shown interest in meeting with a committee of representatives from AE 9/11 Truth, we would not be making this information public. All right, so strike 2, Cyrus Vance, passing up the opportunity to do something good, not just for New York, but for America too. All right, so obviously no interest there in New York City. Well, in New York City, there amongst the people, there's an interest in reinvestigating that. I know that I've talked to people on the street there, but the establishment figures, Cyrus Vance, Mayor de Blasio, no interest. They're scared of this issue. So this is why you got to keep on pushing it, keep on doing whatever you can to bring this issue to the forefront, educate others, speak out, confront people politely, but confront them nonetheless with the facts, and just do whatever you can to push this issue to the forefront. All right, before I play my interview with Rachel Colton, we're going to do what we do every week. We're going to take 10 seconds of silence to remember the victims of 9/11 and their families and all the people who died in the wars that followed 9/11. We're going to do that starting now. And that is 10 seconds. Rachel Colton is a volunteer activist with AE 9/11 Truth. She's been there on the front lines doing what's needed, like handing out pamphlets at the 9/11 Memorial, and she's also been in front of the Homeland Security office out there in D.C. Handing out the pamphlets. She's also a teacher, and she currently teaches kindergarten, and she's also taught 2nd and 4th grade, so she's got a lot of experience. She's here today to talk about her activism and her and how that mixes in with her profession, among other things. So, Rachel, welcome to 9/11 Freefall.
Thank you.
I want to talk first about your activism, but I want you to tell our audience, how did you decide to become a teacher? What prompted you to choose that as your profession?
Well, when I was younger, I always was working with children, whether it was babysitting the neighbors or giving swim lessons at the local pool in the summer. And I always seemed to just have an affinity for understanding children and being able to connect with them. And so I'd always been encouraged to pursue teaching. So I started volunteering in classrooms in high school during study halls, and then I went to Penn State to study elementary ed, continued volunteering in classrooms, and just went from there.
Very, very cool. You know, my mom was a teacher. She was a teacher for many, many decades. It seemed like forever because it was pretty much my entire life. So teachers are very special people, and they have a big impact on kids' lives, as a lot of us can probably attest to, just thinking back to our favorite teacher and people who influenced us, whether it be positively or negatively too. If you get a bad one there, it can also have an impact. Now, obviously, you've done a lot with AE 9/11 Truth, like I said in the intro. How did you first wake up to the 9/11 controlled demolition evidence? What made you start doing your activism?
Well, it was actually just a little over a year. So it wasn't this past September, but the September 11th before that. I always read a book to my students on September 11th. It's called September 12th, and it was written by a class of first graders in 2001 after the event. And it was basically a book encouraging the children to realize that, yes, this trauma happened, but life would go on and things would be okay. The sun would rise tomorrow. So I always read that to my class. And then that year, I asked my second grade students how many of them had talked to their parents about 9/11, or how many of their parents had spoken to them about it. And I was shocked that less than half the students raised their hand. So more than half my class didn't even know anything about 9/11. And I thought that was an issue, definitely, that it wasn't being spoken about at home. And as far as I knew, none of the other teachers at my school were talking about 9/11. So after that, I went home, and I always ride my motorcycle to the 9/11 memorial at the Pentagon. And when I came home, I started watching videos. I've always been fascinated and horrified by the people who chose to jump from the towers, if you can call it a choice. So I was watching videos and footage and started coming across some of the alternative theories on YouTube and just started watching a variety, some theories very out there, and then finally came across Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth. And so I watched all the videos I could on their website and on YouTube. And from there, I just decided that I had to do something to support this cause. So I ordered the lawn sign and decided that since Homeland Security is right next to my house, that I would stand there once a week and give out information to pedestrians and hold up a sign so that rush hour traffic could see as they went by.
And that's important to note that you were living in D.C. I'm not sure if you still live there, but I mean, at the time you were at least. And so this event had a huge impact on your community, hence why it would be so important to talk to kids about it, because these kids would be coming up and probably know people who were affected very deeply by what happened that day, beyond the way that we were all affected watching it on television. So that is very important to stress there. And you said that Homeland Security is right by your house, so you're very close to it. And like I said before, you're handing out pamphlets in front of that building, the brochures. What is the reaction? Like, tell the story of that.
There's a lot of mixed reaction. There's usually one or two people that go by that have a snide comment to make, or they'll just laugh. But I always have several positive reactions as well, and it seems to be that the positive reactions overwhelm the negative reactions. There's people that will walk by and thank me for what I'm doing and tell me to keep up the great work. There's also people who have never heard of Building 7, and when they see the sign that says, "Did you know a third tower fell?" then they start asking me for more information, and I give them a basic synopsis of the evidence and give them a leaflet and encourage them to go onto the website. So it's always a mixed bag. People who disagree strongly, people who agree strongly, and then there's also the people that were not aware of Building 7.
Right, and the propaganda box in most people's living rooms would like to give the impression that that this is a fringe opinion, that this is just a minority of the people that are questioning what happened to the towers in Building 7. But actually, if you get out there talking to people, pretty much everyone has heard of this, and most people have their doubts, have their questions, and support what we are doing. So it's a big facade that the establishment machine is putting out there, and they want to give the impression that people like you and me are crazy. But obviously, listening to you, you're very intelligent, very well spoken, and I think it's part of why I try to bring on people. At least 90% of the guests that have been on here have been new guests each week, because you hear person after person, very articulate, very well educated, talking about this, and some of them are, of course, the building experts featured in 9/11 Explosive Evidence Experts Speak Out, and they're right. They have a point. There needs to be a new investigation, and just you out there, a school teacher, doing what you can to engage the public goes a long way, because when somebody sees a person like yourself standing up, speaking out, then they become encouraged to be the first supporter, and that's an important role too, because it lends credence to what you're saying, and it makes them more comfortable to talk about this. It becomes less taboo when somebody breaks the silence on it. Now,
yeah, I agree. I think there's a lot of people that do disagree with the official story, but don't openly talk about it for whatever reason they have.
Now, I'm curious, when you were at the memorial, compare that to your experiences at Homeland Security. Are they similar, different? Any interesting stories?
Are you referring to the Memorial Museum
In New York, yeah.
Yes, it's a completely different experience. When I'm at Homeland, I am mostly gearing my message to the drivers that are stuck in rush hour traffic just inching along. So I don't have so much interaction with them since they're in their cars. Some people do roll down their window and ask for a leaflet, or they'll thank me for what I'm doing. And then the rest of the clientele, if you would call them that, are mostly students walking to American University, which is right down the street. So it's just students that are going to class. They might have their headphones on or be in a group. And I'll hand out a few signs each night, maybe 10 to 12. But when we were in New York for the museum opening, it was just incredible how many people were filing in and out of the museum from all different parts of the country, all different parts of the world, and the volume of leaflets that we were handing out was incredible. It was hard to keep up at times with all the people that were reaching out for them. And it was a great experience to talk to people from other countries who have a completely different perspective than we do.
That's right, and it's I walked around the what are they called? Reflection pools or reflecting pools that stand, I guess, in the footprints that the towers left, and it's amazing how many people were holding the brochure that AE 9/11 Truth put out. And people can ask me, well, they look very similar to the official brochure. How can you know that that they were ours? Well, ours had I think it was an orange Rethink 9/11 ad on the back of it, so when they're turning them over in their hands, it's very clear to see. And it was just a lot of people, a lot of them. They had more of ours than they had of the official Lie Memorials brochures, and I think that is great. That's a testament to what you're doing. And there's an important need for people to do things like simply handing something out. Not all of activism is confronting people and talking on TV or on radio shows and doing these big dramatic things. There also has to be a lot of grunt work too. People who can just, stand somewhere and do a simple task. People who can do data entry. There's a tremendous need for that in the movement, and it's kind of like a war. And I don't like to compare it too much to war, but like in World War II when they needed people going to the factories to make weapons and such. Well, in this case, this is an important struggle for America's soul and intellectual freedom, so it needs all hands on deck. So if you don't think you're the kind of person that can go out there and talk about the evidence to people, but you want to help out, doing things like this, handing out brochures, or even if you're not comfortable with that, there's other data entry type of things that you can do. So don't shy away from your responsibility as an American citizen, because we can find stuff for you. Now, as a teacher, have you found any issues from people finding out about your 9/11 activism? Feel free to share as much as you want. What were the results of any issues that came up?
Well, I have not had any issues as of yet. It's always something that I am a little bit wary about. I think if I was going to run into any issues, it would have been at the school I used to work at. There are a lot of diplomats whose children attend the school I used to work at, a lot of parents who work for the government, for Homeland Security, and I had the bumper sticker on my car. I have the Rethink 9/11 bumper sticker on my car that was in the staff parking lot. It never came up. And now I'm in a much different area of the city now with lower socioeconomic status. The parents aren't involved in high political positions, so I'm not sure that I would have any issues there. So as of yet, I've had no problem.
how much are teachers, I mean, I figure, on your free time you do whatever you want. I know police officers who are public servants, they can't go out and stand with protesters while they're on duty. But there's really no limit on what you can do in your free time as long as you're not doing anything illegal. If you want to stand up for whatever cause, you have a right to do so. There's really nothing that anybody can get you in trouble for in your profession, as far as I know. Freedom of speech and all of that. Now, have you run into any kind of challenges? I mean, or in doing your job, beyond just people possibly finding out and raising a stink about it, any other kind of issues come up in teaching that clash with 9/11 activism?
I haven't had any, because I teach at the elementary school level, and we wouldn't quite get into 9/11 at the level that older students would be capable of discussing the issue. So I think that it could be a problem in high school or middle school. I have heard of one activist who taught at I think it was a community college, and he brought 9/11 into the curriculum and then was let go. And they didn't say it was because of 9/11, but there's always a chance that if you bring your political views into the classroom and someone doesn't agree with them, that you could find yourself in trouble.
That's right. And again, I don't even, as I've said before on the show, I don't even consider it political. There's always people who say they don't want to talk about this because they don't want to talk about politics. But it's not politics. It's a murder investigation. People died, and they were all Republicans and Democrats and independents, and I bet you there was some Green Partiers in there too, but those people died, and that is bipartisan. This affects America to this day. And so I see it as a murder investigation, and these are legitimate questions that need to be asked, and be asked by people in positions of authority. And yeah, it's funny you say that the person you were referencing at the community college wasn't let go officially for their talking about 9/11, and there's a lot of ways that people can kind of underhandedly, especially in positions of I guess being able to fire you, whoever does that at the school, whether it be the principal or someone else. A lot of times they just find ways around it. They try to look for other excuses to do that, and that's something that people need to be wary of too. Is if something changes in their relationships with superiors after disclosures about their personal lives and their activism with 9/11 Truth comes out, is that a result of that? Now, we're going to talk about curriculum here, and I was a teacher for a short time in the Peace Corps, so I know a little bit about this and child psychology. But in your view, from what you've learned, what is the important goal of social studies lessons? I know they get into that at least at second and fourth grade. What are we trying to teach by including that in their early studies? Getting away from 9/11 for a moment, what's the goal of teaching kids social studies in elementary school?
That's a very good question. I guess it has several purposes. One of the main purposes that I believe social studies is for is to teach students about our country and about our government and how it works, so that they will be educated enough to vote when they're 18 and participate in a democratic society. You also find different areas of social studies that teach more on a global perspective, so world history, where you talk about all the different countries, and a lot of it will go back to the colonization by the different countries in Europe, and teaching about important events in our history and how they changed the way that our country is. So the social studies can be controversial at times and difficult to teach, because you have textbooks that are obviously written by people in power, and they are written according to the official story. But a lot of teachers want to teach both sides of an issue, from both perspectives. So a classic example would be Christopher Columbus. And I feel like traditionally we've always taught that he was this great man who discovered America, But then as you learn more about his actions and how he treated the natives, then we try to teach both sides of the story and that it's not just all good and well. So the fear, I think, with 9/11 is that the official government story is going to be written into history and it's going to become part of the textbook. And then are teachers going to be able to educate themselves on both sides, and are they going to be allowed to discuss it with their students?
You know, I was about to jump out of my seat when you mentioned Christopher Columbus. I was actually going to bring that up because a month ago, I got thinking about, I think it might have been around Columbus Day, it got brought up, and I got thinking about Columbus and this notion that people thought the world was flat that were taught as kids. At least when I was a kid, we were taught that Columbus proved the world was round by sailing somehow sailing from Europe to America proves the world is round, even though he didn't make it all the way around. I don't know, but that's what we were taught. And I thought, well, that's kind of silly. I mean, people had to have known. Well, one example, if you watch the Christopher Columbus dramatic Hollywood movie, there's a scene in it where he's trying to show his son how brilliant he is by having him watch a ship go off into the horizon, and then the top of the ship goes further and further down, and then you see from that the Earth must be spherical. And I'm thinking, okay, anybody can do that. Anybody in a coastal town can figure that out. And then once somebody points that out to you, it's common sense. And so people, I just think there had to have been enough smart people to know the world is not flat. All right. But and right here we have from the Washington Post, busting a myth about Columbus and a flat Earth. And I'm just going to read the first part of it. It says, if you learned in school that Christopher Columbus sailed from Spain in 1492 and crossed the Atlantic Ocean, disproving the common belief in those days that the Earth was flat, then the lesson was wrong. Historians say there is no doubt that the educated in Columbus's day knew quite well that the Earth was not flat but round. In fact, this was known many centuries earlier. And then it goes on and talks about Pythagoras and others who wrote about the Earth being round. So I want to ask you, first of all, were they still teaching this? And this relates, of course, because we're going to tie this around to 9/11 later, but just with this whole notion that people thought the world was flat, were they still teaching this in school? Are they still teaching this, or have they stopped?
I'm not too sure, because that would be something, again, that probably wouldn't be touched upon till later in the middle and high school years. In elementary school, we're mostly just teaching the little rhyme that goes in 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue. So they're just learning the basics, that he made this journey and discovered America. But I'm sure that it is very basic what students are getting in school, and I don't think that they're really delving into what different people knew about different things.
Right. Well, I remember in 5th grade learning that he proved that the world was round, and I had that question in my head. I didn't voice it, but how did he prove it was round by not making it all the way around? But so at least as far, I'm 35 now, so I mean, at least as far as the early 90s, they were still spewing this, and it just makes me wonder who's fact-checking some of the stuff that we teach our kids, or does it just sound like it's nice and sweet, and then we correct them later when they can handle it or are more mature? But I remember growing up early on social studies, you learn basic civics behavior. You know, you fill out the diagram that says I like to be quiet instead of noisy and all of this. And then later on you start learning about America, and we used to go put the flags on the soldiers' graves at the Revolutionary War graveyard next to my school. And I understand why it's important that kids learn how to be orderly and take direction. But how much is done right now for the kids in these younger grades to educate children on the fact that sometimes people in positions of authority may not always have their best interests in mind, and that they need to think for themselves and speak out sometimes against authority when it's not working for them? Because, obviously, kids can be taken advantage of, and they are. How much is done to teach kids this concept?
That's a very good question that you bring up, and it's actually a dilemma that I face on a daily basis as a teacher and a political activist, because classroom management is obviously one of the most important things in the classroom, because if you can't get the kids to sit down and listen, then you can't teach them anything. But you do also have them following rules and not always being able to ask questions that they have because there's not enough time or it's not the appropriate time. And I don't know that they are ever learning that or being taught that there is a time when you should question authority, which is very unfortunate because I think a lot of people are growing up and just learning to follow the rules and go through the motions and sort of stay quiet and stay out of the way.
Well, what bothers me is that in a lot of kids' programming, you learn that questioning authority involves coloring your hair funny color and acting crazy and doing wild stuff and very bad stuff. And I don't see that as questioning authority. I just see that as just acting out and doing whatever you want to do, no matter what the consequences are. But we don't teach them, at least in pop culture, I'm not even talking about school, just the messages they're getting from their programs, that you need to step up and speak out when those in authority are actually doing something wrong, that it doesn't involve just misbehaving, it involves, doing the right thing. And so that disturbs me because we're sending this wrong message to the kids. And, it's funny. AE gets emails from people who are supporters, and there was one. Now, I haven't gotten the school's side of this yet, so it's going based off of one person's story of what happened. But there was one from a parent who said that her son, as was in middle school, was invited to, or not invited, the whole class had to go to some assembly, and from her description, it was like a pep rally, complete with Bruce Springsteen music, talking about 9/11, and they attacked us for our freedom message, and that the boy asked a question about the, how the jet fuel could make the buildings basically turn them to powder, and he was ridiculed. According to her, again, I don't have the school side of this, but regardless of the story, and without knowing both sides, I know situations like that have probably happened. That we don't hear about. Situations like that will come up, especially as the internet becomes so much bigger and our reach gets so much wider. Kids are going to pick up on this and start talking about it in school and bringing the message to events like this. First of all, I sent that email to you just to read it. What's your impression of instances like that? And then we'll go further. There's a couple of angles I want to attack it from.
Right. I think probably the issue there is that the leaders of that school probably aren't aware so much of the other side, and it may have been either a fear that they were going to lose control of the students if they allowed this one student to be heard, as almost arguing with them or bringing up something that they didn't know. There might have been an element of fear there. The other issue might be, I think a lot of schools are afraid of backlash from parents as well in any kind of situation like this. It's an issue that a lot of people still think is very sensitive and still have very emotional reactions to. So they may have been fearing that there would be an uproar from the parents following this if the child was questioning the official story. And then, of course, the other issue is that public schools are funded by the government. So there's also that fear that we can't really be going against what the official story is or being seen as dissenters when we are, in fact, a government institution.
Right, and a part of our government also is the First Amendment, and last time I checked, that is included to everyone, even kids, young people. And I want to go first from the angle of an educator. What do you do as an educator? You're awake to this. You're being told to push they attacked us because of our our freedom propaganda. Again, I know you only deal with the little ones right now, but I mean, just from your own insight and wisdom here, what would you have to say to another educator who's being told to push that?
I would encourage that person to research the alternative theories. I would definitely point them in the direction of architects and engineers for 9/11 truth, because they use science and they use evidence. And I would encourage them to present both sides in a neutral manner. Teach the children what the official story has been and how it's been laid out and the consequences of that, and then present some of the evidence and arguments from the other side and open up a discussion with the students to see what they think makes more sense.
Do you think educators can do that fearlessly? I mean, without any consequence?
It probably depends on the personality of the teacher first. The atmosphere of the school would be another issue. Some schools are very tightly run by their administrators and have to clear all their lessons and lesson plans, and a lot of schools have to stick to the curriculum that has been written in the books. So it would depend on the situation and how much freedom the teacher has to create their own curriculum.
Now, I want to say half a year ago, I don't know when this happened, but not too long ago, there was a substitute teacher who got off talking about 9/11 truth issues. I don't remember which aspects of it, but he was talking about it, and a kid had a cell phone cam and recorded it, and then he showed it to his parents, and the parents raised a big stink about it. Do you want to comment on that kind of a situation?
Yeah, that's definitely something that teachers are always concerned with, is that kids are going to go home and talk to their parents, and their parents have a different take on the situation and are going to show up irate in the principal's office the next day. So we have to be very careful when we bring up sensitive subjects and things that can be considered political. It's sort of like walking on eggshells, but we try to do the best that we can. In that case, I just hope that the substitute has good representation from the administration or his union, because in a matter like that, you may have to take that to a higher level to get support from administrators.
And I used to be a substitute. That was long before I woke up to 9/11 truth, so it never came up. But that is tough, and it's very difficult because, especially if you're just telling the truth and something, let's say you're talking about 9/11, it comes up in the history lesson, and you're talking about free fall acceleration. I mean, these are all facts, but the public has been so conditioned to freak out when they hear people talk about this. They don't want this anywhere near their brains. They don't want this in their child's heads. They want the children growing up to be good little boys and girls to serve this country well and not entertain any controversy. And that's just the situation that's been dropped on us. I've talked before about the second tragedy of 9/11. Beyond the deaths of the people that day, beyond the deaths of the people in the wars that followed and the loss of civil liberties, all that stuff we always talk about, there's also the arguments between family. You know, the relationships that broke up because one person woke up to this and one person didn't want anything to do with it. All right. And now you have this, is that teachers have to deal with this dilemma when it comes up, knowing the truth and being told to push the official story, and how much do you tell the truth, and how much do you hold back because you're afraid of losing your job. So this is the secondary tragedy of 9/11. Obviously, like I said, a student who is aware of all this, he maybe found this show, he's listening to it now. How does he deal with knowing this truth while his peers and the authority figures in his life try to push the official story, or they just don't care about what really happened? How do they deal with this? What would you tell a kid at that assembly?
I think what a student could do is continue doing research on their own, and then if they feel very strongly about it and want some more support, then to find a teacher that they trust and approach that teacher individually, a science teacher, a social studies teacher, and they could take their information and their concerns to that teacher, and they may find that the teacher agrees, and they can discuss it together. I think the issue with the child who brought this up at the assembly is that the leaders are under a lot of pressure to have all the students in one room and to make everything run smoothly, so they don't want one child to be causing a disruption to their agenda, their plan. So I think to maybe just go at it one-on-one with a trusted teacher and see if they can get anywhere from there, or maybe even find some other students that agree with them and they could form a student group and support each other.
That's right, and if you're a young person listening, I would somehow get a copy of the 9/11 Explosive Evidence Experts Speak Out or Blueprint for Truth, and I'd make an appointment with your principal. If you want to do this, do this the grown-up way. This is what we do. Make an appointment and say, look, this is something I'm very concerned about, and I want you to watch this and tell me what you think, and maybe we can start talking about this in our classrooms. And I think that your principal would be very impressed with you if you act very professional and do it that way, and he probably would watch it. I would say that if a student actually went through all of that work, laid it out, and just asked him to watch this DVD, he would probably look at it, just out of respect for your maturity. So, if you are a young person, we'll see if we can hook you up with a DVD and you want to do that. But that would be the way I would go about doing it, and that way it doesn't have to be a hostile confrontation. And I think that is the key thing to winning over people beyond the school setting, is just in the regular society here, is just talking it out. Unfortunately, a lot of people, especially in the media, have taken the conversation above normal tone here. They've taken it to a level of shouting, and they're the ones who started that, and it's kind of set this whole discussion on a bad track, I think, on purpose. But that's where we need to restore it again. Now, what if you're a parent? What if a situation like I described before happens, or your kid's telling you this? What's the proper way to deal with it?
I think the parent also should take the same stance that you recommended for the student and request a meeting with someone at the school, whether it be the principal or a trusted teacher, and just sit down and start a conversation about it and have your evidence there for your argument. And like you said, you could have the video with the evidence, and just ask them to look at it and consider it. And if they don't agree by the end, then you agree to drop it, I guess.
Now, what if there does come to be a serious situation where a kid is ridiculed by a teacher? And I think the situation is destined to happen if it hasn't already. If something like that comes up, if they're ridiculed by a teacher, even in the slightest way, what is the kid's rights in that situation? What is the parents' rights? How do they go about dealing with that?
They definitely have rights. You can take it to a counselor at the school or the administration at the school, and then see whether the administration is going to back the teacher or whether they're going to be open to what you have to say. If the administration is not open to what you say, you may have to seek outside counsel. I don't know if that would be some kind of lawyer or some kind of educational advocate, but if it becomes a serious issue, then it should be taken seriously and could even become a legal matter.
Now, as someone who deals with kids, you obviously know a lot about them. How much should kids know about this issue? I remember, just a really quick story, when I was in kindergarten, very early memory, is this was the election with Reagan versus, I forgot who he was running against, and Time Magazine had some thing where they were asking kids around America who they would vote for, and I remember the teacher sitting us down, and she put a big R on the board, and I forgot the guy who was running against Reagan in that election, but she put the initial for him there, and she did it very fast, and looking back, she was probably thinking it's really stupid to be asking little kids who they would vote vote for president. So she was getting it done in 2 minutes because she just went down the line and kids would be like, Reagan, other guy. And she's just doing a tally right on the board. And I could tell, like, looking back at her body language, she probably thought it was really dumb, but they were telling her she had to do it. And I remember that I was going to say the other guy, because I heard some kid in the beginning say it, and then I forgot the name when it came to me, so I just said Reagan because the kid before me said Reagan, and I didn't want to look stupid. But that goes to show you, though, how little kids know about the world, beyond just what they see on cartoons and in their own family lives. They don't know about this deep geopolitical stuff, especially like at the level you teach, kindergarten. But they start to learn more. They start to become interested in things like World War II and all of that. So as they're growing up and they're getting their slow indoctrination into they attacked us because we're free theory, at what point do you start talking to kids about this? What's the right age?
That's a good question, because it seems like these days a lot of parents tend to want to shelter their children from what's going on in the world and what's going on in the country, so they can just have a happy childhood. And it also seems like a lot of teachers just stay quiet about certain issues because they don't want to get into any controversy or cause a stir. But I think definitely by second grade is appropriate. I talked to my students about 9/11. This was before I knew the truth about 9/11. But I think it's important, and I found that I was alone in even discussing it or reading a story about it. So I think a lot of teachers just want to stick to the books, what's easy and simple, and not get into anything that could be slightly controversial.
It's funny, I didn't really get shielded away from any controversy when I was a kid. My mom was a JFK truther, and we watched JFK, the movie, and I don't know, it just seemed like part of life that, there's questions about the JFK assassination, and that's all part of history, and it didn't really traumatize me. And you see people get all bent out of shape and say, oh, not in front of my kids. I don't want my kids to know about this. And kids are remarkably resilient. They learn things and process it and kind of go on with whatever they're concerned with, whatever it is, football or whatnot. So I don't think it's that bad to talk to them about that at whatever age, if it comes up in regular conversation. And I think they'll be better off for it. It doesn't mean that they have to go out and be handing out pamphlets or anything at age 10, but at least they're smarter, and they know that stuff like this exists in the world, that people in authority do lie, so you need to think for yourself. There was an after-school special that was on in the 80s called The Wave, and the whole premise of it is this teacher is trying to teach his kids about, and these are high school kids, but he's trying to teach them about Nazi Germany, and the kids ask, well, how could people all follow this, someone like Hitler? And so to teach them a lesson, he doesn't tell them this is what he's doing, but he comes in and talks about some new student organization called The Wave, and how they have to do all these things, and the way he does it is very masterful. He indoctrinates them, he gets them all to go along with this, and the kids are all into this thing called The Wave, and being part of this club. And then, to make a long story short, the kids start exhibiting the tendencies that the people in Nazi Germany did, and the one girl who starts getting upset with it and questioning it, and the teacher's acting like a dictator, they start persecuting her. And at the end, he calls them all into the assembly room and tells them the national leader of the Wave is going to be addressing them, and they're all excited, and they're all standing in formation. He puts on a video of Adolf Hitler, and he teaches, and that's the lesson, is how people could go along with it. I think it's very good, and I think it's very important. I think that's why we teach people about Nazi Germany, so it won't happen again, but we seem to lose sight of that lesson, and we just kind of ignore what's going on in front of us. And people will argue about whether or not it's as severe as what happened in Nazi Germany. Well, does it have to be as severe as what happened in Nazi Germany before you start taking action and before you start speaking out about it? Do we need to be getting, standing naked in the snow before we get asking questions of our government, especially with things like, 9/11, where the evidence is so obvious? We do lose focus of that, but the earlier that you start talking to them about this, maybe not at kindergarten, but 5th grade when they start learning about the world, I think the better. I don't think it's going to ruin their lives all that much to know the truth.
Yeah, I think the great thing about kids, especially young kids, is that they never stop asking why. No matter what you teach them, they want to know why. And the trouble, I think, with the younger grades is that most of the kids will believe what their parents believe. So if their parents are Republican and are voting for Republican, that's what their children will come into school and say that they're voting. But I think once you get into high school, that then kids start to be able to think for themselves and to not necessarily just agree with what their parents believe and go along with that. So I think we can definitely start introducing things like this in the younger grades, and then as kids get older, they can start really thinking about them in depth and really debating and arguing them.
A common question I ask people, I'm going to ask you. You're obviously still at it. You still do the work, handing out the pamphlets and the brochures. What gives you hope? What keeps you in this fight?
I guess what keeps me out there every week is the people who don't know about Building 7 and are curious and want the information and are going to go home and look into it. It's great when people thank me and tell me I'm doing a great job and all that, but I know that those people already know. It's the ones that don't know yet and also have not made up their minds that this is a conspiracy theory and they're not going to believe anything we say. It's people who don't know about Building 7 and are curious and want to know more.
Well, I want to thank you, Rachel, for coming on 9/11 Freefall, and we look forward to all the great work that you're going to be doing, and thank you again for all the work you have done.
Thank you.
Don't forget, you can listen to this program every Thursday night on No Lies Radio at 10 o'clock Eastern, 7 o'clock Pacific. You can also download MP3s of this show from the Internet Archive by going to 911freefall.com. This is Andy Steele saying have a great week and good luck.